Okay, great. So my name is Aryeh Sufrin. I work at the Eula Boys High School in Los Angeles, California. I teach. I also work with director of student activities. I work very closely with the freshman and sophomore classes, and as well as my role that I play as far as Israel guidance. I'm not the official Israel guidance person at Eula, but I do work very closely with all the boys. I want to present a uh, a couple lessons that I will be teaching here at EULA for different grades. Now, I don't know if all of you out there are teaching high school. I do want to say that these lessons can be incorporated and changed at any point, the way that you may see fit to work, whether it's on a middle school level, an elementary level. And if you have any questions or you want my notes, in addition to what you see, I'd be glad to email it to you. You can contact me directly at asufferin@eula.org. Um, so for those that teach in elementary grades like Myra, so the sources may seem a little bit more in-depth, but the concepts you could definitely use, and you may not want to learn some of the sources inside, but I think you definitely would find it interesting. So the first has to do with tshuva. One's going to be on tshuva, which is dealing with Aseret Yemei Tshuva, Yom Kippur, the whole Rosh Hashanah, and the second lesson has to do with Sukkot. So if you look at the sheet that I am showing you, just because it's the first time I'm going to sheet, I want to make sure everyone can see it. So if you could just respond that you see me scrolling up and down on the lesson plan. Okay, great. So this first lesson plan basically states the objectives with an introduction and a little map from the source sheets below. I apologize if there's spacing issues between the sources because of the software of this program online, so sometimes there might be some spaces. If you think about it, what I want the kids to learn, since they've been hearing it for the last 15 or 16 years, they've been listening to about what tshuva. This is the time for tshuva. I'm a big believer that what children learn depends not only on what they are taught, but how they are taught. And I believe that if they're really going to take tshuva seriously, they need to be able to have a focus point. I think tshuva is this vague, abstract, idea that we keep telling them year after year. It's time to do tshuva. It's time to do tshuva. It's time to do tshuva. So what does tshuva mean? So as my professors, Dr. Solomon and Rabbi Dr. Foreman, always tell me, it is very important that you state the objective of whatever lesson you're giving. So the objective for you guys is that my lesson plans should give you some insight on what I'm sharing with my kids about their focal point for tshuva, and also different methods that I will use in my lessons, as well as different technology methods that I would use in order to create my source sheets. However, for the students, the main objectives are, you see the first three, I'm squaring them off, that every student should understand the concept what tshuva gemura is. Also, every student should realize that through a sincere tshuva, sins can actually transform from averos into mitzvos, which we will go into. And lastly, every student will understand that executing an enduring tshuva on Yom Kippur is a process. It's not something that just happens. It's not something that you just wake up the next day, oh, I did it. It's a process which goes step by step. At your discretion, at your leisure, you can definitely read through the introduction to the source sheets, the main questions, as far as the guidance. As I scroll down to the source sheet, the first source sheet, if you notice, there's an arrow right here. Now, I use a software that was introduced to me by Rabbi Eli Michel, who works at the Institute, called jingproject.com. Jingproject.com is unbelievable. What it does is, if you look at source number one as opposed to source number two, source number two is basically what a source would look like on Bar Ilan. The generic font. Source number one is basically what the actual text, the Tzura Sadaf, looks like based on the Sefer. So you may say, I want my students to have a source sheet, but I want them to see what the actual text looks like. So what jingproject.com does, it allows you to take a photo of your text on the computer, especially if it's a PDF, and paste it right into a Word document. And then you can do fun stuff with it. So in this example, even though I normally probably wouldn't have an arrow here, I put an arrow here just to show you I want the kids to focus in. This is where the pasuk begins. So in the first pasuk, it's called jingproject.com. Jingproject.com. So in the first pasuk, and this could be used at any level. So in the first pasuk, it says, V'shavta ad Hashem Elokecha, which is a famous pasuk which deal with tshuva, that everyone has an obligation to return to Hashem your God. At this point, I would suggest either giving the students the famous KWL chart, which stands for what the students know, what the students would want to know, and the L stands for at the end you could do a check for understanding of what the students learned. KWL I find work much better for younger grades, especially for a freshman class in high school, and aren't as effective for juniors and seniors. So you could implement a KWL chart, or you could pose a question. For my seniors, I would pose the following question to my students. I would ask them to write down some things that they know they could work on for tshuva. Was their tshuva last year sincere? So on a high school level, this gives you great insight onto things that your students are thinking about, reflection. You know, on a third or fourth grade level or on a middle school level, you also get that insight, but it might not be as concrete, it might not be as specific, it may be more vague, because again, they're still trying to formulate what tshuva means to them. But on a high school level, make them write it down. And ask them to write 4 or 5 things down. What does tshuva mean to me? And what is it that I want to do tshuva for? And you know, one kid might work on something like kashrus, while another thing might work on something like kibud av v'em, honoring their father and their mother. But either way, you're going to gain tremendous insight. At this point, I would then introduce source number 2, which is from Bar Ilan directly, which is based on Hilchos Tshuva. And with this source, we will discuss what the first objective of this class lesson is. And the first objective is to teach the students the concept of tshuva gemura. So the Rambam asks, Ezu tshuva gemura, what is tshuva gemura? He says that tshuva gemura, complete repentance, is when a person has the opportunity to commit a sin. He's in that scenario, and he provides an example in the second line. He provides the example, Ketzad harei sheba al isha ba'avera, if a man was having inappropriate relations with a woman, and he's in the same scenario of sinning, and he's able to pass that situation, that person feels what tshuva gemura is. He's accomplished what tshuva gemura is. At that point, I would ask the students the obvious question. You know, it's very important that at every point, after every source, the students are being asked some kind of reflection. You know, you don't want it to just be a lecture. You know, we've come across to a stage where you know, their research says, I think it was a research at the University of Michigan, that says that our students have a 7 or 8 minute span, an attention span. And the reason is because when they watch a TV show, you know, it goes for 7 or 8 minutes, and then there's a commercial break. And at that point, their brain just turns off. So you always want to make sure you're not just, you know, it shouldn't just be a frontal lecture. So at this point, I would ask them, tshuva gemura, everything that you wanted to repent for, the list that you created, the 5 on your list, whatever that was, is there anything possible that you think you can have a tshuva gemura for? And then I would tell them, and do you know what that could lead to? In source number 3, if you notice, once again, I'm using Jing Project, and at this point, I elected to highlight the Gemara, the text. So it's very cool because I get the actual Gemara, and it's highlighted. So now, at an elementary level, you may not show second graders a Gemara, but you may want them to focus in on a certain line from a story that you're reading to them, or if you're working on shorashim, on roots of words. Highlighting, it helps things stand out. It breaks down a big paragraph. It gives the kids an easier focal point. In source number 3, it says, "V'amar Reish Lakish gedola tshuva shes donos nases lo kiskuyos." An unbelievable Gemara which explains that Yom Kippur, you have a final chance, that Hashem is offering us a deal that we absolutely cannot refuse. To do tshuva, you get to rewrite history at this point. If we do so out of love, our past iniquities, our past averos, will metamorphose into mitzvos. They won't just erase. They will turn in and transform into actual mitzvos. You will get credit for it. At this point, I would tell the kids how unbelievable this is. And I would implement TPS, the famous Think, Pair, Share. This would be a great point to utilize it. At Think, Pair, Share, it enables students to formulate individual ideas, and these ideas with another student. And what it does is, they get to think, T, P, they get to pair up, and share, the S, they get to share those ideas. And this provides think time for the students, which is instrumental to learning. It increases participation amongst every single student. The worst case scenario is when the teacher's in the front of the classroom and is ping-ponging back and forth question and answers with the same 3 or 4 students. There's nothing worse than that as far as a classroom. And also, it's very easy to use in a large class. Kids, get into that TPS, Think, Pair, Share, and discuss right now. And discuss it with them. How can you rewrite tshuva? How can you rewrite history? What are theirs? Focus on it. Think about it. Formulate it. Reflect on it. And at that point, you can ask your students, if they want to share with the class, or you may ask them to write it down, so you could see it at the end. As you transition into source number 4, I would mention that back to source number 3, that Rabbi Jonathan Rosenberg, who's a Rav in the Valley in Los Angeles, California, he asked, how can one do this? How can one actually change averos into mitzvos? And he proposes the reason is because if a person does a tshuva gemura, which is objective number 1, if he completes a full tshuva, that sin he will never do again. And it's actually prevented him from doing something in the past that would be avera. It's now called zichuyos because it shows the approach and probably perform the right things. It is an impetus of my future behavior. And this, in addition, answers our objective number 2. That the kids need to know that doing tshuva gemura changes what they do. It tips the scale from averos into mitzvos. It doesn't just erase everything, but it actually puts you on the side of merits and not just on the side as far as the negative side, which is the averos. The 4th side, which is also another gemara, is just a gemara that I would want the kids to speak about. I personally wouldn't focus too much on it, and I would share with them this gemara that how Balei Tshuva Omdim Tzadikim Gemurim Einam Omdim, where retroactively Balei Tshuva have the potential to stand in places that the greatest tzaddikim who never sinned would stand. And that is an important thing for them to realize. The power of tshuva, how Hashem views tshuva. And I would ask them to relate that to their personal lives. How much do we appreciate someone who apologizes sincerely? As opposed to that person who just says, "Oh, do you forgive me or you mochel me?" That person who apologizes sincerely, we think of them in such a positive light. And because of that, the Gemara brings down, says, you actually stand in a place where tzaddikim are unable to understand. A fascinating insight into the Gemara. That Gemara alone, you can make a whole shir on, that Gemara alone, but I'm going to choose not to focus so much on it. So at this point, we've implemented an anticipatory set question, we've stated our objectives, and we've implemented TPS, the Think, Pair, Share method, to encourage kids to interact with each other. But now I have to pose the question to the kids, and this is the question of the class. The question is, if we know this every year, that tshuva metamorphoses into mitzvos, and tshuva puts you on a level where you're greater than tzaddikim who never sinned, why do we always fail? And this question could be asked at any grade level, whether it's high school, middle school, or elementary. Every single year, Rosh Hashanah comes, Aseret Tshuva hits, Yom Kippur comes, we're on a high. Yet, a week later, we seem to be on to the same things that we've been doing year out and year out. And it seems like we never change, and we never fail. And I want the students to think about, why is it that we don't execute a sincere tshuva that will have an enduring and will be everlasting? How do we get them to think about that? So the answer is in the next source, but the answer is a general concept that I think most of us know. Maybe we don't know the Gemara, but we know this idea. And it's that we focus on way too much. How many times are our goals they're too high? We don't set realistic goals for ourselves. Have the students focus on one of their items that they listed at the beginning. Tafasta Meruba, says the Gemara in source number 5, which I highlighted once again from jingproject.org. Tafasta Meruba lo tafasta, tafasta mua tafasta. It is so important that we teach our kids that if you try to do too much, lo tafasta, you're not going to be able to achieve success. But tafasta mua, if you try to take things one step at a time, little by little, only then we'll be able to achieve what we want to achieve. And I would have the students once again pair up in their groups that they were paired up in the beginning, using TPS, Think, Pair, Share, and discuss now from their original list. They created 5 or 6 items that they need to work on for tshuva, and I would have them pick one. Focus on one. My goal this year is kibbud avim, or someone else's goal might be, to work on lashon hara, or maybe lashon hara is too big of a goal. To work on not speaking lashon hara 1 hour in a day, or to work on shmiras einayim 10 minutes a day. It doesn't matter how small that goal is. What matters is that the students realize they need to focus on something that's realistic that they can achieve. One of the greatest things about the fellowship is that I get to speak with colleagues around the country on a daily basis. Over Rosh Hashanah, I had the privilege to speak with Noam Weissman, who teaches at Shalhevet High School, and he's incorporating this idea of tafasta meruba lo tafasta mua tafasta, with bein adam lechavero. There's a famous Rambam that says that it is important that we do tshuva bein adam l'makom for God, but when it comes to bein adam l'chavero, if we don't ask mechila from our friends, the tshuva won't happen. And if you think about it, how many times do we send those mass text messages or those mass emails? And kids could relate to this because they're all about the text message, whether it's Facebook, whether it's MySpace, whether it's email, whether it's text messaging, BBM, a BlackBerry Messenger, whether it's Twitter, whatever technology they use to send mass messages. How sincere are those mechila apologies that we ask? And at that point, ask the kids to reflect, to pick one person that they could focus on and have a sincere apology. How much more meaningful would that be? How much more meaningful would it be to them? Would it be to the person who they asked Michal to? Now, don't get me wrong. If they could do it to everybody, that'd be amazing. But we have to lower those goals that are realistic. And that is the answer to the big question. Why do we always fail? Because we set our standards too high. And the best part about source number 5 is that if the kids use TPS, the Think, Pair, Share, they will be able to think about it themselves. At no point should you be telling the students this message. They should reflect and pick their own goals. You should not and you must not pick the goals of your students. Because as soon as you do, it becomes insincere. It needs to be something that they find real, that they can do, that they can accomplish. In source number 6, I want to focus on, this is in the Machzor in davening, but I want to focus on the concept of probing questions. All the educational articles and books, especially Marzano, discusses the importance of probing questions. Don't just ask students questions that will give you a yes or no answer. Because how do you know that they really know what they're saying? If I ask you a question, is the sky blue, yes or no? They have a 50-50 chance of getting that right. Ask a question that will develop thinking. For example, what's the purpose of this source? In source number 6, I would ask the students, what is the purpose of this source? Why did I put this source here? To remove the Satan which is in front of us, and from behind us. What is so significant about this source? Why is it important? Let them think about it. And then I would ask them, why is it relevant? And they should write this down. Every single student should write this down. Maybe on their KWL chart that they were given in the beginning, or on a piece of paper, however you want to formulate your shiur, but have them write it down. You may want to hear some people share those ideas, but whatever you do, make sure you're developing their statements. Extend what they want to say. Clarify. Don't just nod your head and say, okay. Ask other students to respond to their answers. You know, it shouldn't be that you ask a question, the students answer it, and then you say, oh, that's great. Have it be a conversation around the classroom. There's nothing wrong with Shmuel answering David's question, and then having Rivka get in there and respond to it. That's what the kids want. They want the discussion, no matter what grade level you're in. And at this point, I would say we daven every evening. We say this in Ma'ariv in Arvit every evening. Do we realize what we're saying? Is the Satan in front of us, or is the Satan after us? And I would explain to them that there are two types of Yetzer Haras in the world. There's the Yetzer Hara that we are so familiar with, that is in front of us, that basically is a stumbling block for every little thing that we do. Whether it's waking up in the morning, whether it's davening, whether it's ben adam lechavero, the Satan is always focusing on us, always trying to prevent us from doing that mitzvah. That's the Satan we all know, face to face. We all know he's there. But then u'me'acharenu, there's a second Satan that's behind us. The Satan that we're not so familiar with. The Satan who prods us from behind. He's persuading us to accomplish things too quickly. He's persuading us to fast the meruba. You want to daven? Go do it. You want to learn? Go learn. Learn for 80 hours a day. Do it all. Take it all so quickly. That Satan is tricking you in thinking that what you're doing is correct. But really what he's doing, he's setting your goals too high that you're doomed for failure. And the students should at that point reflect, what is that Satan doing for me? Who is that Satan me'acharenu? Who is that Satan behind me? And what is it that I'm trying too hard? Maybe it's not just mitzvahs. Maybe it's too many extracurricular activities in my school that prevents me from focusing on my academics. Or maybe it's focusing too much on my academics that's preventing me from succeeding in my social life. It could be so many things. But the Satan is there from behind us and from behind us. He wants us to concentrate on all our energies and efforts. So it'll be too much for us. At that point, I would tell the students, we must concentrate our energies and our efforts on perfecting and polishing that single mitzvah, the tafasta muad. And if I was teaching this on an elementary level, I would pick one thing of tshuva to focus on. It might be, as a class, everyone as a class will take upon themselves to say Shabbat Shalom, Good Shabbos to every Jewish person that walks by them in shul, after shul. Just ben adam lechavero. But you need to set a focal point. It needs to be a goal that we could achieve. And again, I can't reiterate the importance of probing the questions, making sure that you're asking the right questions and you're challenging the students. If at any point you're just lecturing these sources and you're yabbling along, with all due respect to all the rabbis in the communities, what differentiates you from a sermon in shul? Not that that's the appropriate way to give a sermon, but it needs to be intellectually stimulating. The Torah needs to be, Rav Soloveitchik states, the Torah needs to be not something which is intellectually stimulating, but also needs to be an emotional experience. And the only way that the Torah can be an emotional experience, as Rav Soloveitchik, if the guys are getting involved. If they're choosing their mitzvah, if they're choosing their goal, if they're deciding for it. In source number 7, the pasuk says, "Kol dodi dofek pischli achzira isi onisi tamsi." It's a whole pasuk in Shir Hashirim, which basically reiterates the point where Kadosh Baruch Hu tells Bnei Yisrael, "Open for me an opening of tshuva the size of an eye, a little eye. How big is my eye? How big is anyone's eye? The eye of a needle. And I shall open for you the openings of wagons and cars that can pass through." Hashem says it in Shir Hashirim. Guys, tafasta muad, if you do a little, you pick that one mitzvah that you could do tshuva for. If you do a little, Hashem will open up the doorways and the pathways. You will be able to accomplish so much more. In source number 8, I would have the boys, especially in my class, provide examples. For example, the pasuk says, "Shuvu elai v'shuvu aleichem," in Tanakh, in Malachi, which basically means, "Return to me and I shall return to you." That's what it means. Return to me, I shall return to you. Where Hashem, and I would give an example. For example, when photons are concentrated into a laser beam, energy which would otherwise barely illuminate a room, it is now capable of boring through steel, and all of a sudden you have a light flying through the room. Or if a karate master who's able to break 10 stacks of bricks with his forefinger, with his palm, he becomes capable of smashing bricks with what seems to be no apparent effort because he's able to have a focal point. Shuvu elai v'shuvu aleichem, Hashem says, I will do the rest. I will return to you. But you have to pick that focus point. At this point, I would have the boys pick their tshuva item off the list. Or if you remember in the beginning of the lesson, as part of the anticipatory set, the first thing the boys did, or the students did, was identify 5 or 6 things that they need to work on when it comes to tshuva. All very appropriate, all important. We should definitely explain how important each item is. But now I would tell them, pick one. And that one you should share with your group in your TPS group that you've already met with 2 times in this year, in the beginning and in middle of this year. Pick that one and pick an example. Specify that example and share it with the person. And now your friend could follow up with you and write it down. The most important part of having the students write it down is that you get to see it. And if you get to see it, you get to see where your students are coming from, what they're struggling with, and you get to provide feedback and follow up with them. I can't tell you how many times I just gave a regular shiur in class, and then a month later, since I was able to give the necessary feedback based on some sort of TPS check for understanding item where I was given some tremendous insight into something that a student was struggling with, how much it meant to them and how much it inspired them. Especially last year, we ran a tefillah project, DIG, the Dig Tefillah Project. You can find the video on YouTube, Eula Digs Davening. And when I followed up with the boys, you saw a difference in their davening. And one of the boys came up to me and said, "Rabbi, if you would have never came up to me 4 weeks later, I would have never thought it actually meant something to you. I would have thought you would have been teaching." If you want, you could. I included the 9th source just to make you familiar with another tool that's on jingproject.com. And that it's a different Gemara. I mean, I'm not going to teach it right now, the source. But if you notice, I created boxes. You may want to put a few lines of a Gemara on Jing Project or of any source, whether it's Chumash, whether it's something in davening in a siddur, and you want them to focus in on 2 words. But you don't want to highlight it. You want to create a box, Shiva Dvarim or Tshuva, and at that point, it allows you to, the kids can see it. It stands out. It gives them a focal point, which is really important when it comes to learning. And I can't reiterate how important it is to always end a class by checking for understanding, whether they're submitting their KWL charts and always give feedback, whether it's a question sheet that you handed out that they're submitting, or whether whether you're reviewing their selected tshuva responses, follow up. Remember, they appreciate it. And make sure that they understand that tshuva is a process that involves baby steps, and it's a goal that can only happen one step at a time. I now want to transition into my lesson that I will be working on for Sukkot, for Sukkot. Now this is more of a fun project, less of a serious, intense shiur. And it's a performance assessment that I created. Now if you're not sure what the point of a performance assessment is, just to fill you in, being in Dr. Solomon's assessment class was truly insightful and helpful when it came to appreciating performance assessment. Performance assessments requires students to perform a task rather than select an answer from a ready-made list like a multiple choice question list. Performance assessments makes learning fun. They require students to actively demonstrate what they know. So they get to show that what they've learned is actually means something to them and they actually know the material. But remember, the two biggest rules when it comes to performance assessment. You must make sure the material teaching is worth teaching to. Don't just think that, oh, this is a fun game, it's a game, the kids will have a good time. It's not just about having a good time. It needs to be worthwhile material. The teacher will use their own discretion on what's worthwhile. And secondly, performance assessment must be, and I really say must, it must be curriculum based. Make sure they see a point to it, that they're learning based on what the curriculum is, and it's not just coming out of the blue, because they won't take it as seriously, and they won't respect the performance assessment down the road if you give it for something on the curriculum, because it was a game to them to begin with. Dr. Solomon provided me with a New York Times article, you could Google it, that came out last week, which actually states that multiple choice and standardized testing, it's actually being overhauled by 44 states. Each state is being given $330 million to design new assessments that include formative assessments and performance assessments. So performance assessments are the new in, if you think about it. And kids are learning. With technology today, it's so important. So I created this lesson, which is a performance assessment, and which will also focus on skills building. The last year on Endurance Tshuva wasn't so much on skills building, but was more so on focusing on what they could do for Tshuva, while this will be focusing on actual skills. If you look at the article, just a creative newsletter I made, the LA Jewish Times, it's the Gulf oil crisis, which is something which, we all know what's going on, threatens the holiday of Sukkot for the greater Los Angeles community. So basically, in a nutshell, you could read it on your own. And again, I could send this to anyone with all the material, with all the notes. Just email me at asufrin@eula.org. Basically, I mentioned in the article how there's a shortage of material that can arrive to the West Coast through the Pacific Ocean, through the ports, because of the Gulf crisis, and therefore we don't have enough sukkah building material. So the rabbis instituted a law, a takana, just for this year, that everyone who builds a sukkah at home has to build a sukkah with the smallest possible measurements that is kosher by halachic standards. Now there is a machlokas on that, but I'm not going to delve too much into it with the students. And the EULA 9th grade class had been appointed by the community as the poskim and the helpers to build this project. And what they're going to do is they're going to be divided into groups to learn the sources that are necessary. And then they're going to actually have the performance assessment will consist of actually building the sukkah, which shows that what they learned is as important. But I want you to remember, I have two objectives in this lesson. Objective number one is the performance assessment, the building of the sukkah. And objective number two is the skills building, that they should be building skills when it comes to words. Now, Marzano states that skills building when it comes to vocabulary is perhaps the biggest misconception, is that teaching vocabulary means teaching formal dictionary definitions. When I'm talking about skills building, I'm not going to give them a word bank and say, if you don't understand these words, look it up in a dictionary, okay, and figure out the words. That's the biggest misconception. I want them to learn it with their groups. So I'm going to use before I get into the lesson, it's very important that the students see a criteria at any level, whether at their a high school level or they're at a elementary level, middle school level. Students should always see the clear expectations and criteria. This will be a cooperative learning technique that I'll be using, otherwise known as jigsawing. Jigsawing promotes better learning. Research says it increases the enjoyment of learning, it develops social skills, and it increases student retention. In addition, obviously, when jigsawing is happening, you should always be monitoring the groups and walking around making sure everything is going on. To answer your question, Chaya, yes, they will actually be building a sukkah. If you look at it, the groups in this lesson, they will be created in 4 groups of 4. Each group will be assigned a source sheet on one specific item, whether it's schach, the height of a sukkah, the length and width of the sukkah, or the appropriate wall requirements for the smallest possible kosher sukkah. And they will be instructed to master their material with their initial group, whether it's the schach, the height, the length, or the width, and then they will be jigsawed into groups so each group can share what they've mastered to formulate an actual kosher sukkah. I made sure to clarify the materials, which will be the source sheets. They can use parents, they can use rabbis to help learn the sources. They can incorporate new material as long as it's supported by their source sheets. And and any building material that they use must adhere to halacha. Again, if you see, I mentioned the allocation of time and how the students will present the requirements. I can't reiterate the importance of the students seeing the criteria. When you give a performance assessment, if the students don't see the specific criteria, things will be vague. If you don't give them the expectations, don't expect them to meet your expectations. Because what you say, they might have different expectations for. If you look, in addition, I give them an assessment rubric. Now, in the assessment rubric, this, again, clarifies the way I will be grading them. I will be grading them in 4 parts: the group learning, the written assignments, the presentation, and making sure that they met the smallest possible kosher sukkah. I can't reiterate, if they don't see the rubric, and if they don't see the criteria, there will be a lot of confusion. The scary part of a performance assessment is that if they're not able to see the specific requirements of expectations, you're going to have a mess. It's going to be a bunch of, people are going to be bringing in different sukkahs, and it's probably not going to adhere to halacha, and things are just going to be really confusing. So again, don't be vague. There should never be a vague area. It should always be clear. So at this point, once they have their expectations, each group is being given 4 different source sheets. In this example, just for you guys, I put in the source sheets the English translation just to save time on teaching the actual material. So if you notice, source sheet A, source sheet A, I apologize for the ugly circle, but source sheet A, trying to find that highlighter. There we go. Source sheet A, let me just get the right color. There it is. Okay. Source sheet A deals with the height of a sukkah. And since it deals with the height of a sukkah, anyone who's in that group is only required to learn the minimum requirements for the height of a sukkah. And they have to learn these sources. If you notice, each source sheet, actually the first 3 or 4 sources, are all the same. That means every group is learning the same 4 sources to begin with. Besukot, Tishvu, Shivat Yamim, Kol HaEzrach B'Yisrael Al Yeshu Besukot, which is basically the same 4 sources, which explains that you shall sit in a sukkah for 7 days, which explains the importance of a sukkah. And in the second source, it explains how a sukkah is a temporary dwelling place, and it's constructed outside one's home under the stars, etc., etc. You're definitely able, you can read these sources on your own time, and if you have any questions, please email me. The third source in this case, gets to what we need to deal with. A sukkah shehi gevor lamala me'esrim amma, sukkah which is taller than 20 amos is psula. So that means basically a sukkah can reach up to 19 amos. But that's not what we want to know, right? We want to know the minimum amount of requirement for a height of a sukkah. So therefore, if you want to know, by the way, 20 amos, I explained the specific measurements over here, 40 to 50 centimeters, and I mean these are how the rabbis explain the measurements. But in the next source, in the final source, in the Rambam, in the final source, it explains Shira sukkah gvo ein pachos me'asar tefachim sula. The minimum height of a sukkah must be 10 tefachim. So anyone in that group must master that material. They must be aware that the sukkah is only 10, that can only be up to 10 tefachim. And that is what they mastered. And now they will be able, when they get jigsawed into their other group, to be able to provide that insight by teaching the sources to their group. Now, I like to implement in the initial grouping something called Team Pair Solo, TPS. TPS could also be Think, Pair, Share, but it also could stand for Team Pair Solo, which means that everyone first works as a team. Everyone first works as a team in order to learn their shear. And since they're in a group of 4, they then split up 2 and 2 into a pair. And they review the lesson. They review their shear to make sure they've mastered that material. And then once they reviewed it b'chavruta, now they could go solo. Now they're ready to go on their own and share that information they've mastered with the next group, which is why I call it jigsawing, TPS style, team, pair, solo. Meanwhile, while this group is learning the height of sukkah, group number 2 will be mastering the walls. And if you notice, sources number 1 and 2 are the same as in the other sources. And then at the end, I'll just share with you the bottom line, which says that the Gemara qualifies the statement that the sources have to be 2 full walls, but the third can be even a tefach, which basically tells you that the minimum amount of walls that a sukkah could have is 2 walls, 2 full walls, and the third one could be a little tefach. But more importantly, it says here on the last source that the walls of the sukkah may be made of any material, but must be sturdy enough to withstand an ordinary wind. So now the students understand what they're dealing with. By the way, you may find that something like this, although the sources might be a little difficult for middle school kids would enjoy this very much. This is something that I highly recommend on a middle school level, and I definitely recommend on a freshman and sophomore level. On a junior and senior level, we could talk about another time through email or on the phone, different things I would implement when it came to this performance assessment. I wouldn't show it as is. Meanwhile, the third source would be dealing with the length and the width, and I won't go through the information right now. It's all there for you to read. While the fourth source sheet explains the kosher schach. Now, once everyone has done the TPS, the team, the pair, and the solo, once they've hit that part where they're ready to share it, they share the material. And as a group, they are able to now build a kosher sukkah by the minimum standards. And at that point, we would go back to the sukkah's performance criteria and rubric explaining what is expected in their presentation. And at this point, they would focus on that their presentation was in the right amount of time, that they met all of the halachic requirements. Now, I do want to also point out is the beauty of this is that they get to focus on skills building when it comes to reading the words. They shouldn't just look in a dictionary. They have 4 people in their group that could help them. And if there's one word that you're struggling with, feel free to have them jigsaw onto another group just to get that word. It's okay. You could do things on the fly as long as it maintains the appropriate structure. You will find that the kids will find this project a lot of fun because a performance assessment, what it does is it requires the students to demonstrate actively what they know. They get to demonstrate it. They get to show you. They get to build it. They get to struggle with it. And while doing this, they get to learn with it. So I hope at this point, by the first lesson of enduring tshuva, you're able to see more of a serious way of giving a shiur that with different interventions. And that shiur focused on the most important part, which is in my lesson, that every student should realize that tshuva is a step-by-step process. Tafasta meruba lo tafasta, tafasta muat tafasta. And by sukkah building, you have the source sheets and a way that they get to build a fun sukkah in a fun way, in a really fun way. And when they bring their sukkahs in, they're going to be proud to present it. I would recommend taking pictures of their presentations, maybe creating some kind of blog where you could send it to their parents, because they shep nachas. The parents shep nachas from something like this. They like to see these things. These are really, and I will definitely be using this lesson. I can tell you that I've already taught the Enduring Tshuva lesson, and it was extremely successful, and the kids really appreciated the fact that they were able to personally reflect on something. On that note, I do want to share a short Dvar Torah, which just to take us into Yom Kippur. We know that it says tshuva tefilot tzedakah ma'avirin es roa gezerah, that in order to take away the decree of miyanuach, miyamuz, who's going to drown, mimagefa, who will die by a plague, we have to do tshuva, tefillah, and tzedakah. If you look in your machzor, on top of the word tshuva, it says the word tzom. And on top of the word tefillah, it says the word kol. And on the top of the word tzedakah, it says the word mammon. Tshuva, which is tzom, means you have to fast. Tefillah, which is kol, you have to listen to the voice. And tzedakah, which is mammon, you have to give tzedakah through money. If you take the gematria of tzom, kol, and mammon, each one's gematria comes out to 136, which right there teaches you a very valuable lesson. For some people on Yom Kippur, giving tzedakah is their focus point, their tafasta mua tafasta, that one thing that they decide to focus on. For other people, it might be tefillah. For other people, it might be actually through fasting, tshuva, picking an actual midah that they will work on. But in Hashem's eyes, they're all equal. They all equal 136. How much more so if you add all of the gematrias together, 136 plus 136 plus 136, it equals 408. What is 408? There's a pasuk in Acharemos which says, "Bezos uva Aaron el HaKodesh," and when Aaron entered the Kodesh Kedashim, it's in Acharemos, it's in part of the laning on Yom Kippur. When Aaron enters the Kodesh Kedashim, Zos, he went in with this. So Chazal asks, what is this that he went in? The gematria of Zos is 408, which is the total of Tzom, Kol, and Mammon. That Aaron reached a level that he was able to perfect tshuva, he was able to perfect tefillah, and he was able to perfect tzedakah, which is why he was worthy of entering the Kodesh Kedashim and being our representative on Yom Kippur. Therefore, I give us all a bracha. Step by step, we should all get to that point where we could reach the level of tzom, kol, and mammon, where we reach the level of tshuva, tefillah, and tzedakah. But remember, like we tell the guys in enduring tshuva shiur, you have to do one step at a time. And I hope that this tshuva shiur and this lesson in performance assessment has given you some insight to show you that you can have fun in the classroom. It is absolutely encouraged to have fun in the classroom, but in a way that sticks to the curriculum and in a way which is worth teaching to. As I quoted earlier, what children learn depends not only on what they are taught, but how they are taught. I wish everyone a Gemar Chatima Tova. I think you guys can still hear me. I appreciate all the compliments. Yeah, Joey, Kol is also 136. That's the point. That Kol, Tzom, and Mammon all equal the same. And I by the way, I should also mention, I asked my 9-year-old brother-in-law before Rosh Hashanah for a Dvar Torah on the phone. I was like, he's like, you're a rabbi in the school, so I always ask him for a Dvar Torah. And he's 9 years old. And he spit out this Dvar Torah, and I was blown away by it. I mean, I did hear it before, but I was blown away that a 9-year-old could spit this back, which goes into the whole scaffolding thing. We think that our kids can't do it, but we have to set expectations a little higher than what they're capable of. And I was definitely blown away by it. I want to reiterate that if anyone has any questions or want any notes or source sheets without notes on it, you can email me at asufrin@eula.org. Yeah, definitely open up the mic if anyone wants to ask the questions. I put my email there. Also, you could reach me on my cell directly at 310-991-6547. The Gemar Chatima Tova to everybody. I will take questions if anyone wants to get in on the questions. Can you really raise your hand on this? That's pretty cool.
Yeah, you can raise your hand at the top.
Very, very well said, Shira. I mean, if at any point I mentioned that we should set tshuva low, that it definitely wasn't what I was trying to say. Tshuva expectations should be high, but by setting the low, it should be step by step. Thank you, Shira. Very well said. Excellent point, Shira. Excellent. But yeah, exactly, Eliezer. The goals need to be realistic. I asked my senior class just this morning, what's tshuva all about? And you'd be surprised that the answers are so like blah and generic and the same things they've heard over for the last 18 years. And it's such a sad thing because if they've heard it over, why isn't anything happening? Joey, I think you informed me about a study. It might have been you, or it might have been Dr. Solomon, of a university who who told one professor that he was getting the smart class, and told another professor that he wasn't getting the smart class. So they changed the way that they were teaching as far as expectations. And at the end, when they took their standardized test, there you go. Thank you, Eliezer. Chaya, thank you. Way to get in there. So the same thing. I always definitely set expectations higher. I'll give you an example. I'm teaching a non-honors Gemara class in 9th grade, but everything I teach in my class is exactly the same that they're teaching in the honors class. And I explain to the students the only difference between the AGT Gemara, the Advanced Gemara track, and my Gemara class for 9th grade is that they don't have to come in on Sunday to learn. But as far as skills level, everything's exactly the same. I set those expectations. You got to set those expectations high. All right, guys. So I'm gonna head out. I want to wish everyone a Gemar Chatima Tova. I also want to thank Yeshiva University for this opportunity. Joey Small, Shira Heller, and I want to thank Martin for making this all happen, and thank everyone for just being great listeners. I hope I didn't bore you too much. Gemar Tov.